Hello, everybody. It's Books at Lunchtime. We're at Kett's Books again, and I'm here not in Kett's Books. Tracy is in Kett's Books, and we're very lucky this morning because we've got an extra person. We're speaking to William Shaw. Good morning, William.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm very well. It's a lovely sunny day here in Brighton.
Well, that's jolly good to hear. It's not too bad up here. And I'm hoping we can bring the sunshine to everybody's bookshelves this morning and just have a bit of a chat about some books that near and dear to you and get a few more recommendations and conversations going around them. So exciting times. If you don't know, if you're watching this and you're not, and you don't know, part of the reason we're speaking to William this morning is that he's part of our One Community, One Book project that we do. And so this year, so the project is that each year we choose a book and we encourage people within the community and beyond to read it. So it functions as a kind of town-wide book group. So this year, the book that we chose was Deadland by you, in fact. And in a normal year, we would have had lots of lovely sort of events and so forth. But obviously, that sort of put paid to that slightly. Can you tell us a bit about it, William, before we go on to your other titles? Tell us a bit about that.
Deadland was, I wanted to write a chase. And Deadland's basically a chase format of these. I write detective series fiction, and generally they start with the idea that there's a dead body found and the detective has to work it out. But I really love chase books as well, and so at the beginning of this book, there's two young lads from Dartford in Kent, and they do something very bad. They steal a phone. They think they ought to, they're just mucking about. They're bored, and despicably they steal a phone. Only they find out they've stolen completely the wrong phone. And on this phone is this bit of information. And this bit of information is important enough for somebody to want to kill for. And it kind of takes you through the North Kent landscape, because I've been writing a lot about South Kent, but that whole North Kent landscape along the Thames is really fascinating bit of land. And very sort of post-industrial, very often used right the way, over centuries for quite intensely. And a lot of it is left as this kind of strange marshland, and I just wanted to explore that a bit.
The landscape's really important in your books, isn't it? So those of you who aren't familiar with William's work, you have two sort of tranches, I suppose, don't you? So two sort of series that work, and the Deadland is one within a series that's set around the South Kent coastline around Dungeness, isn't it? How important is landscape to the plot of what you do?
Well, in that series particularly, I wanted landscape as a character. I loved all that sort of Scandi noir that came out, because the land was always there and the environment around them was always there, and so I chose Dungeness as a place because it's a bit Scandinavian in some ways. It's a place very affected by the weather. It's just this flat spit of land that goes out into the channel, and it's the most extraordinary bit of landscape. And so I chose that as a setting, partly so I could write about landscape. And Kent is, it's surrounded on three sides by sea. It's like Cornwall. It's one of these places where the environment is very present, but also local politics are obviously huge around Kent. It's where kind of very much the thought behind Brexit, I think, very much came from that area. And in some ways, Kent is a kind of bellwether county. Things that happen in Kent are likely to happen to the rest of us. So I thought it was a great place to start.
That's really interesting. I think you started to touch on that there. It's something Tracy and I have been talking a lot about with your books, is that I think what we find really interesting about them is how the plot centres on some sort of social issue as much as, you mentioned wanting to write the chase, but, whether it's, immigration or this or that or the other, there's some sort of social issue at the heart of them. And I think that's true for your new book, or the newer book that we have on the shelf, Gravesend. Tell us a bit about that.
I love what Tracy's doing. This is a brilliant Exhibit A. I think detective fiction is a remarkable form, and the more I've worked in it, the more I've realised that what it does is you are writing about something fantastical like a murder, but at the same time you're writing about something very real and non-fictional, about a landscape or social environment. And one of the reasons why it has such power is I think that detective fictions, the detectives investigating society, if that's not too pompous a way of putting it, as much as they are investigating the murder. So in Gravesend, which was so beautifully displayed there, it's really about housing and planning, which is a huge issue at the moment, and especially in Kent, where a lot of greenfield sites have been built on. And I'm really interested in the wild landscape that's left in our country, and I think you've got a real battle going on in Britain about whether you build on land because housing's desperately needed, or whether you build in spaces that are less profitable, like urban spaces, brown spaces. And so I kind of chose that for Gravesend. It's about a housing estate being built outside Lydd and all the conflict that comes to it, and especially conflict with nature. And I was speaking to all the people you speak to when you're researching a book, and I said, what? I spoke to some ecologists, and they said, well, write about badgers, because badgers are the key species when you're developing a greenfield site. So great. So hard to sell a book about development and badgers, but that's what it is. It's not really, it doesn't really work in the crime fiction way that normally is. Let me tilt away from the light there. It's getting so sunny here. I'm getting some glare.
Don't rub it in.
So yeah, it required me finding out a lot about badgers, which was lovely and really interesting, and the realization that we actually don't know much about them, because like dark crimes, they're very hidden. They come out at night, and we very rarely see them. We understand until very recently, we've understood very little about badger behavior. So I talked to a lot of badger experts, and it was lovely.
For a moment there, I thought you were going to say you talked to a lot of badgers. So I'm glad you clarified that. That would have been straight to the badger's mouth, as it were. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. And this is part of the Detective Cupid series, isn't it? So just trying to give readers an idea of where it sits within the rest of your writing. So there are how many books now in her series?
Well, there was a book
on
the Birdwatcher she arrives in. Very good. Brilliant. Then Salt Lane was the first of the ones where she's kind of like the starring role. And then Deadland and Gravesend. And I've just finished one coming out next year called The Trawlerman, which is, again, set very much on that south coast to do with the fishing fleets, which actually took me out. I went out on a trawler earlier this year, which was great to research that. I found a local trawlerman down in Folkestone who was willing to take me out overnight. While everybody else is in lockdown, I was sitting off the Kent coast in this trawler. It was most extraordinary.
How exciting. So, oh, wow. So you're really tickling your interests there, exploring all sorts of different things through work. What a nice thing to be able to do.
Great. It was really good. Yeah.
Do you have anything to ask, William? I'm monopolising the conversation here, Tracy.
Not well. No, I'm really enjoying listening. Thank you. I have in the shop with me Ian and Nicola, and they are very helpful. And Nicola's just bought us a copy of this because it's topical. Badgerlands. So just to be aware, that's also available. So thank you, Nicola.
Has the most extraordinary end chapter, that book. It's well worth reading. Yeah, because that's really about how, housing and badgers, the end chapter, they're kind of encroaching each other, and people are making friends with badgers, because very often if you build a housing estate where badgers are and you don't do something about them, the badgers don't move. So either you put people in conflict with them, or you have people coping with the fact that badgers come to their back gardens. And there's a lovely scene at the end of that where people are kind of feeding badgers in it, and it's a very meditative kind of thing. And I think that's what happened a lot, because badgers are most extraordinary. Like humans, they fight rather than move, and they fight very fiercely, which is great metaphors for me, obviously.
Right. Okay. So that's got to go on my pile now.
It's the perils of working in a bookshop. You don't actually sell books; you just amass a reading
How
list.
do you cope? It's bad enough being a writer because you get sent to loads of, but and I'm a slow reader. You must have to read so much, but a pleasure. But also, you actually do need to, because people expect you to know about them.
Yes, it's tricky, but it's a joy. What else? I would only add to the discussion of the Alexandra Cupidi books that there is a very human story that develops through them in her life and in her relationship with her daughter, and how she grows to give her daughter space as her interests grow. And I have reflected on some of that. It's certainly not a parenting guide, I would say, Deadland, but or Gravesend even, but I found the relationship between them and the respect that she finds for her daughter Zoe is a really interesting one, and I took a lot out of that. So right through.
Well, that's great. That's really lovely to hear, actually. I mean, I kind of think, you know, as a parent myself, the experience you have is that you're always failing. And I kind of wanted to take that into, I got very tired of reading men writing women, where the women are absolutely fantastic all the time, because they're trying to overcompensate so much for them. And I think that actually it's just a natural bit of parenting, that you kind of don't get your children. You don't really, how much you try to, they can baffle you as well. And that you always feel you're not doing it quite right. And I thought, you know, I could sympathize with that. So that was very part, you know, that's written from life.
Yes, well, everyone we talked to has enjoyed them. So thank you for bringing us these books. I have my own personal pile. I also have a stack of books which you have enjoyed. Would you like to talk about those?
Yes, I would, very, very much. The first book I'd like to talk about is a book called November Road by an American writer called Lou Berney. And I'm not a huge fan of American thrillers right now. They tend to be so big conspiracy sort of stuff that's almost, you know, they're always about killing the president in particular ways. Lou Berney's different. He writes these really human stories, and yet that's a big traditional American conspiracy theory about the assassination of JFK. But it's a lovely bit of writing, and he's a real character writer. I'm currently still reading his new one, The Long and Far Away Gone. And it's even better, I think. But that's a great book out in paperback this year.
That's that one.
Now, what's next on my list? Because I was trying to print out my list before this came, but my printer's run out of paper. You hold up a book, and I will try to talk.
I'll go alphabetically. Okay. So
Jane Casey. Again, I only just discovered Jane Casey recently. I mean, I met her as a fellow writer lots of times, and only got around to reading that book this year. She writes police procedurals like I do. Hers are set in London. They have a fantastic character called Maeve Kerrigan. And it's a real joy to find somebody who's written a really classy series like that. And, you know, because you come in halfway through, you think, oh, I've got a whole lot more to read in this. They're just, again, they're really great character pieces. Again, with a socials kind of edge to them as well. They're very much about, that one's very much about class in London. You know, contemporary ideas of class. And I think it's a brilliant book. She's a great writer.
Excellent, thank you. Sunday Times bestseller and an Irish Book Awards Crime Fiction Book of the Year winner. Who else? So alphabetically, we next have another Kett's Books favourite.
Oh yeah, well, Ellie Griffiths lives down the road. She's a friend of mine. So plugging a friend's books, you always think, oh, am I just plugging it as a friend's? But actually, I think this is, she's taken the whole project a real step further with this book. I think the great thing about Ellie Griffiths' books is she's got a different way of writing crime now, and it's really evolved over that period in that it's a very gentle way of writing crime. And that's not to say they're cozy, they're very contemporary and realistic. But in this book, it's a really nice sort of clever, it's a satire about crime writers for a start. It is. And it hits the basis of having a sort of real nod back to that old-fashioned golden age style of crime writing. But it's also very contemporary. And what I really loved about this book is the heart of it. There's a group of 3 characters living in the seaside town, one of whom's a misfit detective. And they end up finding this project of a murder that doesn't feel quite right. And it's a really lovely read. Do you know what I mean? If sometimes you get a bit weary with the sort of relentless realism of crime fiction, I really recommend her books. It's not that they're not realist, but they've got a very human take.
Yeah, and these are not part of the Brighton series or part of the Ruth Galloways, are they?
And it's a complete standalone, and it works really nicely so. Although it does feature the same detective. I think she's unwittingly falling into the trap of doing a series.
She is.
because the same detective was in her last standalone, whose name currently escapes me.
Harbinder.
Yeah, Harbinder Singh, yeah. Harbinder Kaur, yeah. But yeah, great book.
Here we go. I wasn't prepared. Right, so this is the first one in paperback, and Harbinder's the detective in
Stranger
this.
Diaries.
And then the same detective turns up in this, but it's actually the people who live in this retirement home who are trying to solve the crime, which she's not convinced there's the crime, but they convince her that there is.
Yeah, and they're just really nice characters. It's a really nice lesson in using eccentricity as a kind of positive. You know, everybody's their own person in that book, and it's really nice.
I really regret that we're unlikely to see the characters in this again, because I loved them.
Yeah, and then it's a road trip as well, which is really nice.
Is.
I mean, very few people write a road trip. They go on a road trip through England, basically, to solve it, and that really helps.
Yes, they do. And I want to go in that seaside cafe, but that's not going to happen. Alphabetically, we've got 3 H's. Jane Harper.
Jane Harper, well, you know, yeah, I mean, holding up the Dry was really good, because I think the Dry really knocked everybody's socks off. I mean, it's one of those actually genre creating kind of books.
Yes.
In that, and for me, as somebody who writes about landscape, it put the landscape into a book in a way that was brilliant, and the peril that the Australian landscape is kind of undergoing. And there's another book I'll be talking about in that same sort of way. So there was another book in between, and then she came back with A Lost Man. And I think it's really fantastic when you just know a writer's going to have a brilliant and long career when the third book is even so much better. And I think, you know, I haven't read The Survivors yet, which is just coming up as a fourth book. But it's just great writing. That kind of outback mystery characters. It's a top book, highly recommended.
Yes,
and, you know, she's really up there now at the very, you know, top table of major crime writers.
Our customers have really enjoyed her fiction.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
What a discriminating lot you have there.
We aim for intelligent. Intelligent, not intellectual. We don't want to be snobby about it. And I've now got, look at this one, a nonfiction selection.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I just chose that because I kind of used that when I was reading, when I was writing actually Deadland and Gravesend. I was dipping into that a lot. And it was a book my editor sort of said, oh, you should read this. And at first I thought, why? But it's just about weather and landscape in British fiction. Going back, well, in European fiction, it goes back to Beowulf and all that stuff. And it's just really talking about the weather in books and how people wrote about the weather and what that says about the history and society of the time. And it's just a really clever idea for a book, really just so brainily done. Alexandra Harris, isn't it? And I think we all notice that and absorb it when we're reading, but very often don't stop enough to think about what writers are doing when they talk about the weather. So it's just a lovely, lovely idea and so brilliantly done.
And it has other fans. It was chosen as a book of the year by the Times, the Independent, the Sunday Times, the Observer, and the Times Literary Supplement. So it's got a few fans.
It's a way of upping my game reading books like that. And oh, clever people have done this.
Yes. And the last one you've suggested to talk about is Scrublands.
Yeah, another of the letter H's. It came out. It was actually written shortly before The Dry, and came out in its wake, which I think is a bit of a shame because it's a brilliant book in some ways. I thought it was better than The Dry, although Jane Harper's got has got better and better. But actually, I really love that, and it really does have that sense, which both books have, but it's really strong in Scrublands, of the kind of obliteration of the middle of Australia. And you really get the sense of communities just clinging on now by their fingertips in some of the places out there. And it's quite an involved plot in that. And it gets more and more complicated, but actually the action ramps up really nicely as well. I think it's a great book as well. So yeah, Scrublands.
Excellent.
That's just made me realise that I can think of so few Australian authors that I've read.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, it's a great literary tradition, isn't it?
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Peter Carey. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's interesting how countries pass around the baton that way, and sort of, Ireland's really having, it's great to mention Jane Casey, but Ireland's having an amazing moment in crime fiction over this last couple of years, with Dervla McTiernan and Dervla McTiernan and my mind goes blank now, Liz Nugent, people like that. I mean, it's really got a really strong, and obviously it's always been a fairly literary country, you have to say, but there was no crime coming out of it, and suddenly there's the floodgates have opened, and it's sort of gone very global, and people around the world are just like people have said, oh, we've got to have an Australian crime writer now after Jane Harper. Now all the publishers are saying, oh, we need 2 Irish writers and things like that. So they have their moment, and it's really good to see.
Excellent. Well, I think that our lunch break is probably nearly finished. It's been lovely seeing you again, and we've really enjoyed working with you this year.
It's been wonderful. It's been lovely coming out. I do miss, I was supposed to be up there, of course, sometime around this time of year for another session, and it's been a real shame. We can't do stuff like this, but we can do stuff like this, and maybe more people will see this.
You've got a standing invitation to come to Kett's Books whenever you want. As soon as you're able, come back and we'll all queue up to get the Trawlerman and whatever comes next.
Thank you very much indeed. Have a nice sarnie for lunch, I hope. Nice cup of tea.
Yes,
I think we need a big cup of tea today to stave off that eastern wind that we seem to be experiencing. Oh, there we go. You're already one step ahead of us.
Yes, and here in the bookshop, we've got the door standing open because it's click and collect and until 2 o'clock. So the heaters aren't very effective. So yes, I will go and make myself a cup of something hot to hold. So, right. Well, lovely to see you both again.
Nice to see you, William. Thanks for that.
Take care.
Great.
Thank you. Bye.
All the best.
Bye.